Luke Harding lived by the creed that the fewer people you spoke to before noon, the better the day went. And if you spoke to no one at all, well, that was close to heaven. His horse ranch was less a ranch and more a collection of corrals and a tight cabin clinging to the dusty edge of Dry Creek. The town itself was a hard place, baked into the grit of the 1870s. All false fronts and thirsty men. Luke made his living with his hands, gentling wild mustangs that others deemed broken and guiding surveyors who did not know the land's dangers. He avoided the army barracks, the saloon's sour whiskey, and the general clamor of men who talked too much and said too little. His solitude was a worn blanket, frayed but familiar. The only company he kept were his horses and the ghosts that rode with him in the quiet hours. The ghosts always came before dawn. He woke with the taste of ash in his mouth, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The scream was still lodged in his throat, a sound he had swallowed years ago. In the dream, it was always cold, the air sharp with frost and gunpowder. The blue-coated cavalrymen, his brothers in arms, descended on the sleeping Comanche village like a judgment from a cruel god. He was a scout then, young and stupid, believing in the flag. He saw the lodgepoles snap like twigs. He heard the tearing of buffalo hides, and he saw her, a little girl, no more than 9 or 10, with eyes as black and deep as a winter river. She stood by a burning teepee, her family dead around her. She did not cry. She just stared at him, her gaze a steel blade that pinned him, accusing him. He had hesitated, his hand on his carbine, a word of protest dying on his lips. Before he could move, a corporal, his face red with bloodlust, grabbed the girl by the hair and dragged her away. Luke had done nothing. He had watched. He had stayed silent. Luke sat up on his cot, the rough wool scratching his bare chest. The dream left him hollowed out, a man carved from dry wood. He had left the army a month later, honorably discharged, but he knew the truth. He was a coward who had traded his soul for a pension he never collected. He splashed cold water on his face from the basin. The face that looked back was hard, aged beyond his 30-some years, his eyes the color of a faded blue uniform. He had a job today, a job he did not want. The men from the railroad were waiting at the livery, all expensive boots and soft hands. They smelled of city money and impatience. Luke took their coin, his jaw tight. He was to guide their survey team into the Comanche Valley, the same valley the army had cleared all those years ago. He knew what the stakes and flags meant. They were nails in a coffin, hammering down the land, pinning it for the iron horse. Every step he guided them. He was helping them steal what was left. Colonel Silas McGraw was there, his uniform crisp, his presence a dark cloud. He was not officially with the railroad, but he was always near when land was about to change hands. McGraw was a man who believed the only good Comanche was a dead one, and he made no secret of it. Harding, McGraw nodded, his eyes like chips of ice. Keep these gentlemen safe. We would not want any misunderstandings with the locals. Luke just grunted, swinging up onto his buckskin. He hated McGraw. He hated the smiling surveyors. Most of all, he hated himself for taking their money. They rode for 3 hours, the sun beating down. The world shrunk to the clop of hooves and the jingle of harnesses. The valley opened up before them, a green slash of cottonwoods and creek water in the dry plains. It was beautiful. It was still alive. The first arrow came from nowhere. It thudded into a surveyor's saddlebag, the feathered shaft vibrating inches from the man's leg. The man shrieked, nearly falling from his horse. "Ambush!" a soldier screamed. They scrambled for cover, a pathetic huddle of men behind a shallow wash. Luke unslung his rifle, his movements fluid and practiced. He scanned the ridgeline, his scout's eyes picking out the shimmer of heat in the flick of movement. They were there, not many, just enough to make a point. "Hold your fire!" Luke yelled. "They are just warning us off." "Warning us," McGraw snarled, his face purple. He chambered a round into his rifle. "They are savages. Harding, we will show them what a warning looks like. Fire at will." A volley of panicked shots ripped through the air, kicking up dust on the ridge. Luke saw a second arrow arc through the air, aimed not at the group, but at him. He tracked its flight, moved his head an inch. The arrow hissed past his ear and slammed into the ground near his boot. He raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel. He saw the flicker of painted skin, the dark hair. He found his target, a warrior perched on a boulder, drawing another arrow. His finger tightened on the trigger. And then the warrior stood. Luke's breath caught. The figure was framed against the sky, wearing a simple buckskin shirt and a single eagle feather in her hair. It was a woman. She was young, lean, and held her bow with a deadly grace. She was not aiming at the soldiers. She was aiming directly at him. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. There was only the woman on the ridge and the man in the wash. She was too far to see his features. He was too far to see hers. But he felt her gaze, sharp and knowing, like the girl's in his nightmare. He did not shoot. He could not. She lost the arrow. It flew true, not at his chest, but at his rifle. The impact was a violent crack. The wooden stock of his Winchester shattered, splinters digging into his hand. The force of it knocked the useless weapon from his grasp. She had disarmed him. She had spared him. Then she was gone, melting back into the rocks as if she were never there. The other warriors vanished with her. The silence that fell was louder than the gunfire. One of the surveyors was whimpering. Colonel McGraw was swearing, a long, vile string of curses that fouled the clean air. "You see," McGraw raged, stomping toward Luke. "They are animals. They attack without provocation." Luke stared at his broken rifle, his hand bleeding freely. "She did not attack me, Colonel. She warned me." "She—" McGraw stopped. His eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "The one who shot my rifle." "It was a woman," Luke said, his voice flat. He met McGraw's gaze. "They do not want to fight. They want us to leave." "A woman," McGraw spat, as if the word were poison. He looked at Luke with a new, dangerous suspicion. "You seem mighty observant. Harding, perhaps too observant." He turned to his men. "This is a declaration of war. I will see that valley cleared of every last one of those filthy creatures if it is my last act on earth. We are going back." The ride back was tense. The surveyors were terrified. The soldiers angry. Luke rode apart, his mind not on the grazing wound on his arm where he had fallen scrambling for cover, but on the ridge. He was haunted. That sharp, clear gaze. The strength in the pull of that bow. She was not a savage. She was a warrior, protecting her home. She was everything he was not. He parted ways with them at the edge of Dry Creek, ignoring McGraw's order to report for debriefing. He went to Martha Ellis's general store. Martha was a widow, tough as cured leather but with kind eyes. She saw him come in, his hand wrapped in a bloody kerchief. "Luke Harding, you look like you have been wrestling with a bobcat," she said, her voice dry. "Just a disagreement with some landowners," Luke said. He picked up a large sack of flour and 2 glass bottles of fresh milk from her icebox. Martha raised an eyebrow as he paid. "That is a lot of baking for a man who lives alone." "Luke—" "Company's coming," he lied, poorly. She just looked at him, her gaze knowing. "Be careful," she said, her voice soft. "Colonel McGraw is not a man who likes to be contradicted, and this town, it is getting nervous. People are scared." "I am not scared of McGraw," Luke said. "Maybe you should be," she replied. That night, Luke did not sleep. The nightmare waited for him, but this time it had a new face. The girl's accusing eyes blurred into the warrior woman's steady aim. Long after midnight, when the moon was high and cold, he saddled his buckskin. He rode not toward town, but toward the valley. He rode with his senses sharp, every shadow a potential threat. He reached the edge of the contested land, the place where the prairie broke into canyons. He dismounted, taking the sack of flour and the 2 bottles of milk. He walked to a large, gnarled cottonwood tree, a landmark known to anyone who traveled this way. He set the provisions down gently at its base. It was a stupid gesture, a fool's errand, atonement for a sin too large to be covered by flour and milk. He did not know who would find it. Maybe the wolves, maybe the buzzards. But he had to do something. He had to show, he did not even know what, that not all white men were McGraw, that he was sorry. He turned and left, never looking back. From a ridge 200 yards away, 2 figures watched him. They had been tracking him since he left his ranch. Tana held her bow, her body tense, ready to kill. Beside her, her younger brother, Little Fox, watched with wide, curious eyes. They watched the tall white man leave the strange gifts. They waited until his horse was a distant dot on the plain. Little Fox looked at his sister. "Why does he bring us the white man's food?" he whispered. "Is it poison?" Tana did not answer for a long time. She stared at the small white sack and the glass bottles gleaming in the moonlight. She recognized the man. She had recognized his eyes on the ridge. He was the scout from the massacre, the one who had looked at the children and done nothing. And yet, he was the one who, moments later, had quietly pointed a different cavalry patrol away from the gully where she and Little Fox had been hiding. He was a man of contradictions, a coward and, perhaps, something else. Old Naya, the tribe's healer and wise woman, joined them from the shadows. She looked down at the offerings, her ancient face a map of wrinkles. "He brings bread and milk," she murmured, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "Be careful. Tana, the one who brings food, often brings trouble with it." Tana watched from the ridge as the man's shadow disappeared into the gray wash of pre-dawn. The air was cold, and old Naya's words were still colder. Trouble. The word meant little. Trouble was their daily bread. Little Fox shifted beside her, his eyes fixed on the cottonwood tree below. "He left it, sister, just like the last time." "I see that," Tana said. Her voice was sharp. She was suspicious. This scout, the one from the massacre, the one who had spared her rifle but not her people, was playing a game she did not understand. Poison was the white man's way. Kindness was just a slower poison. "I am hungry," Little Fox said. It was not a complaint, just a fact. Tana looked back toward their hidden camp. She heard it in the silence, the absence of laughter, the weak cough of the elder, the thin cry of a baby whose mother's milk was running dry. The great herds of buffalo were gone, pushed south and slaughtered by the railroad crews and the hide hunters. Her warriors, proud and strong, had returned from the last 3 hunts with barely enough rabbits to feed the children. They were starving. "Go," she said, her voice tight. "But be smart. Do not touch the milk. Not yet. Take half the flour. Only half. Leave the rest. We will see if this ghost returns." Little Fox nodded. He moved like a shadow, his bare feet making no sound on the rock. He slipped down the incline, retrieved 1 bottle of milk and half-emptied the flour sack into his own pouch. He was back beside her in moments. He had the speed, but not the patience. Tana uncorked the bottle. She sniffed it. Milk. She dipped a finger in. Tasted it. It was rich, sweet, not poisoned, not this time. She let him drink. His relief was a knife in her gut. She would not drink. She was the warrior. She could wait. The next night, Luke Harding returned. He found the half-empty sack and the single bottle. He stood there for a long time. Just looking at it, he, too, understood tests. He took the empty bottle, refusing to leave his glass trash on their land, and replaced it with a full sack of flour and 2 more bottles of milk. This became their ritual. For 2 weeks, Luke rode out in the dark. He never saw them. He was a scout, trained to see the unseen, but they were the people. And this was their land. They were invisible, but they left him signs. He would find the bottles empty, the sack gone, and in the bark of the cottonwood, he found small tokens. The first was a single blue jay feather, bright and defiant. Next, a sprig of dried sage. He did not understand their language, but he understood the message. We are here. We are watching. The offering is accepted. His actions, however, did not go unnoticed. The fort was a small place, and suspicion spread faster than prairie fire. A soldier, sent by McGraw, found him in his cabin. "The colonel wants to see you, Harding, at the fort, now." Luke pulled on his boots, his gut tight. He had hoped the beating he took in the brawl would buy him more time. But McGraw was not a patient man. The colonel's office was suffocating, smelling of leather polish and stale cigars. McGraw was standing over a map, his thick finger tracing a line straight through the Comanche Valley. "Harding," he said, not looking up. "You healed quickly, or perhaps you were not as injured as you claimed." "The ribs are still sore," Luke said, his voice flat. McGraw finally looked up, his eyes small and hard. "You have been busy, riding out at all hours. My patrols have noted your peculiar schedule." "My horses get restless," Luke lied. "Do they?" McGraw smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression. "Or is it you, Harding, restless for your new friends?" The room went cold. "I do not know what you mean. Colonel?" "Do not play the fool. It does not suit you." McGraw slammed his hand on the map. "The railroad is waiting. The politicians are waiting. And I am waiting. But this infestation in the valley delays us. A few warriors, led by a woman. You said a woman who shot the rifle from your hand." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The men are talking. Harding, they say you let her. They say you went soft." "The men can say what they like," Luke said, his own voice hardening. "I am not soft. I am just tired of killing." "That," McGraw said, "is the problem. You are a scout, Harding. Your job is not to be tired. Your job is to find—" He pushed the map toward Luke. "I gave you a mission. Reconnaissance. You failed to execute it, claiming you were indisposed. Your brawl in the saloon was convenient." "It was not convenient. It was painful," Luke said. "This time, you will not fail." McGraw tapped the map. "I want you to ride out. Tonight, you will find their camp. You know the terrain better than any man I have. You will find them, and you will mark their location on this map. You will not engage. You will not be seen. You will simply find them, mark the map, and return. Is that clear?" It was murder, a map, a pin, and in 2 days, cannons would follow. He would be leading the cavalry to the slaughter, just as he had all those years ago. His stomach turned to acid. "What if I refuse?" Luke asked, the words tasting like ash. McGraw's smile vanished. "Then you will be tried as a deserter and a traitor. Martha Ellis will weep at your hanging, but she will be the only one. You are a man with no allies. Harding, you walk a very thin line. Do not make me push you." Luke looked at the map. He saw the valleys, the creeks, the places he knew, and he saw the faces of the children he was feeding. He was trapped. "I understand," Luke said, picking up the map. He was a dead man either way. The news from the fort filtered down to the Comanche camp, carried on the wind of gossip from a half-Comanche tracker McGraw foolishly employed. The colonel was planning a final strike. The scout, Harding, was being sent to find them. In the camp, the desperation was a palpable thing. The flour and milk were gone, a temporary relief that only made the return of hunger sharper. The elders, their faces grim, confronted Tana by the fire. "You brought this doom upon us," Stoneface, an old warrior whose sons had been killed, accused her. He pointed a shaking finger. You took his gifts. You showed him our weakness. Now he has finished the job." "He did not know where we were," Tana shot back, her own voice rising. "His gifts kept our children from starving. Am I to be blamed for wanting them to live? The buffalo are gone. Stoneface, your pride will not feed them. Your anger will not keep them warm. It is the anger that keeps us Comanche," he roared. "You trust this white man. You let his food soften your heart. You are not thinking like a warrior. You are thinking like a woman." Tana stepped close to him, her eyes blazing. "Yes, I am," she whispered, her voice deadly. "I am thinking of the women who will have to bury their children. I am thinking of the mothers. If his guilt can be used as a weapon, I will use it. I will take his bread. I will take his milk. And if he comes here, I will take his life." The argument was cut short. A scout whistled from the ridge. A rider. Alone. Luke had not intended to go to the fort. He had not intended to do anything but ride his horse until it dropped. The fight in the saloon had bought him a day, but it had also marked him. He had been in Martha's back room, his ribs freshly taped, a cup of coffee in his hand. "You are a fool, Luke Harding," Martha had told him, her hands on her hips. "You cannot fight the whole United States Army. You cannot fight the railroad. And you certainly cannot fight Colonel McGraw." "I am not fighting them," Luke had muttered, wincing as he moved. "I am just not helping." "That is the same thing to men like him," she warned. "They are saying you are a traitor. That is a hanging word. Luke." He had left her store, the taste of cheap whiskey and his own blood still in his mouth. He was halfway to his ranch, the empty quiet of the prairie stretching around him, when the arrow landed. It thudded into the ground, vibrating, not 3 inches from his boot. He froze. He knew that accuracy. "That was a warning," Tana's voice called out from the darkness. "The next one will not be—" She stepped out from behind a stand of yucca, her bow held loosely, but ready. Little Fox was at her side, his eyes wide, a knife in his hand. "You are a hard man to kill," Tana said, walking toward him. The moon caught the sharp planes of her face, but an easy one to find. "I was not hiding," Luke said, his body aching. "No, you were clumsy. You were loud. The fight in the saloon? A good distraction. But he will send others. He sent you tonight. Did he not? With a map?" His blood ran cold. "How did you know?" "We know McGraw. He is a man with no imagination. And we know you." She nodded at his bruised face. "You look terrible." "I feel worse." "Good," she said, without sympathy. "You are coming with us." "I do not think so," Luke said, tensing. "You do not have a choice." She pulled a rough burlap hood from her belt. "Put this on." "I am not your enemy," he said, holding up his hands. "You are not our friend," she countered, her voice like flint. "You are the man who brings bread. We need to know why. Put it on, or Little Fox will cut your throat, and I will let him." Luke looked at the boy. His hand was shaking. Luke looked at Tana. Her hand was steady. He was tired of fighting. He took the hood and pulled it over his head, plunging himself into a world of scratchy darkness. They led him for what felt like miles, up rocky game trails, through a cold stream to cover his scent. His ribs screamed with every step. Finally, they stopped. He heard the crackle of a fire, smelled roasting mesquite, and heard the low murmur of voices. They pulled the hood from his head. He was at the edge of a camp, hidden deep in a box canyon, invisible from the plains. It was small. He saw skin lodges, a few lean-tos. Women and children watched him, their faces hollow, their eyes full of fear. Tana pushed him against the cold sandstone wall. Little Fox tied his hands in front of him. The knot was secure, but not tight. He could slip it if he truly fought. It was another test. Tana stood before him, the firelight dancing in her dark eyes. making them burn. "Why?" she whispered, her voice a low, furious growl. "Why what?" he asked, his own voice rough. "The bread, milk." She gestured to the hungry faces watching them. "Why is this a white man's game? Do you feed the children to fatten them for the cannon? You bring us food, and then you bring them this." She tore the map from his pocket. The accusation was so close to the truth. It hit him harder than any fist. "No," he said, the word cracking. "Then why?" she screamed, all her control breaking. "Why do you do it?" He looked away from her, at the fire, at the shadows of the children. He saw the girl from his nightmare. He saw her everywhere. "Because I was there," he said, the words rusty, pulled from a place he kept locked away. "Years ago, at the Washita. No, it was near the Cimarron. It does not matter. I was there. I was the scout. I led them to the camp." Tana's hand flew to the knife at her belt. "You," she breathed, the word full of venom. "I was young," he said, the confession pouring out of him now. Unstoppable. "I thought it was my duty. I thought they were savages." He looked at her, forcing her to see the shame in his eyes. "And I saw her, a little girl, your age. Maybe. She just stared at me. She did not scream. I did nothing. I had my orders. I did nothing." His voice broke. He leaned his head back against the rock, the fight gone out of him. "I have been doing nothing ever since. The bread and the milk was not for you. It was for me. It was so I did not have to watch children starve again because of what I did, because of what I am." The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. Tana stared at him, her face a mask of stone, but her eyes were confused. Old Naya stepped out of the shadows. She was ancient, her face a roadmap of time. She ignored Tana. She ignored the knife. She walked right up to Luke and placed one gnarled hand flat on his chest, over his heart. Luke tensed, but her touch was surprisingly light. Her eyes closed. She stood that way for a full minute, as if listening to a distant sound. "His spirit is loud," she murmured, her voice like dry leaves skittering on rock. She spoke to Tana, but her eyes were still closed. "It is full of ghosts. He walks in darkness. He carries a great, heavy guilt." Tana waited, her hand still on her knife. Old Naya opened her eyes, and they were sharp and clear. "But the heart beats true," she said. "It is a foolish heart, a broken heart, but I am not a liar." She turned to Tana. "He is a man of two worlds, and he belongs to neither. He is dangerous to us, and dangerous to himself." "We should kill him," Little Fox whispered, his voice trembling as he tried to sound like a man. "He has the map." "No," Old Naya said. She looked at Luke, a long, measuring look. "We will not kill him." She turned back to her granddaughter. "McGraw sent him to find us, and he is, now, we will see. We will keep this man. He will not be a prisoner. He will not be a guest. He will be here. We will see if the man who feeds children will also lead the soldiers to them." Luke Harding's life was reduced to the essentials: horses, water, and vigilance. Old Naya's decree had made him a half-free prisoner, a ghost in their hidden camp. By day, he was untied, his skills put to use. He was a horseman, and they were the finest horse people on the plains. It was the one language they shared without words. He helped mend the small, tough pony's hooves, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle. He showed them a white man's trick for reinforcing a corral gate, a skill that earned him a few grunts of grudging respect from the older men. He hauled water from the spring-fed creek, his shoulder muscles burning. He watched the women, their faces etched with worry, stretch every piece of food, every scrap of hide. He saw a poverty that was desperate, but a dignity that was unbreakable. The children, at first terrified of him, soon grew bold. He taught them a simple slipknot, one he had learned as a boy. They, in turn, laughed at his clumsy attempts to pronounce their words. "Tasi, Poppy, water, horse. His tongue felt thick and useless. At night, the hospitality ended. A warrior, often Little Fox trying to look stern, would tie his hands loosely to a lodge pole. He was given a blanket and a piece of dry meat. He was a captive, but he was not treated cruelly. He was simply held. Tana watched him. She watched him constantly, her black eyes missing nothing. She stood on the canyon rim, a silent sentinel, as he worked with the horses. She felt a strange, unwelcome irritation. The children, her children, the future of the people, were beginning to follow him. They gathered in a small, giggling knot to watch him whittle a piece of cottonwood into the shape of a bird. She saw him with a small, thin boy, one whose cough kept the camp awake at night. Luke was given his meager portion of roasted rabbit. Tana watched as he sat, his back to the canyon wall, and palmed half of his own meat, handing it to the boy when he thought no one was looking. The boy devoured it, his eyes wide. Tana's gut twisted. She hated this. She hated the white man's blood in him, the uniform he used to wear. She hated him for the memory of the massacre, for the family she had lost. But a different, older memory fought with that hatred. She remembered that day. She remembered the chaos. She remembered 2 soldiers, drunk on whiskey and blood, cornering a group of children. She remembered this scout, this Tasi Taibu, this white man, riding between them. He had not drawn his gun. He had just yelled at them, a furious order, something about orders from the general, and the soldiers had cursed him and left the children alone. He had saved them then. He was feeding them now. He was a man who had participated in a slaughter, yet had twice stood between children and death. The contradiction infuriated her. It made her heart beat in a strange, uneven rhythm. The tension broke, as it always did in the West, with blood. Little Fox, desperate to prove his manhood and fill the camp's empty bellies, had gone hunting alone. He returned not with a deer, but slung over his own pony, his leg twisted at a sickening angle and blood pouring from a gash in his thigh. He had cornered a wild boar, and the boar had won. He was delirious with pain. Old Naya began to chant, applying a poultice of herbs. But the wound was deep, the blood pulsing in a way that spoke of a cut artery. The boy was fading, his skin pale and clammy. Tana was frantic, holding her brother's hand, her face a mask of terror. "Let me," Luke said, his voice quiet but full of authority. Tana's head snapped up. "No, you will not touch him." "He is bleeding out," Luke said, pushing past her. He knelt by the boy, his hands already moving. "I need fire, clean rags, and your knife. Tana, now." She hesitated, her hand on the hilt. "He will be dead in 10 minutes, Luke said, his eyes locking with hers. "I am a scout. I was trained by an army doctor. I can stop this." She saw no lie in his eyes, only urgency. She threw him her knife. For the next hour, Luke worked. He was no longer the quiet prisoner. He was the man he had been trained to be. He sterilized the blade in the fire. He had Tana and another woman hold Little Fox down. He found the artery, his fingers deft and sure. He used a needle pulled from his own small possibles bag and horsehair thread, boiled clean, to stitch the wound. He bound the leg tight with splints made from lodge poles. He never hesitated. He worked with a grim, focused efficiency that was both terrifying and magnificent. When it was done, he sat back, his shirt soaked in sweat and the boy's blood. Little Fox was pale, but his breathing was steady. The bleeding had stopped. Luke looked at his hands, covered in the blood of a boy he was supposed to be betraying. "He will live," he said, his voice rough. "He needs to rest. Lots of water." Tana did not say anything. She just looked from her sleeping brother to this impossible white man. She had been ready to kill him, and he had just saved the only family she had left. The camp's mood shifted. The warriors still watched him, But the open hostility was replaced by a confused respect. The children now touched his arm as he passed. Old Anaya brought him a bowl of broth, a gesture that was not lost on anyone. Luke knew this fragile trust was a death warrant. He had been gone from Dry Creek for nearly 5 days. McGraw was not a patient man. He was a traitor in the eyes of the white world, and a captive in this one. He was a man with 2 shadows. He found Tana by the creek, washing the blood from her brother's clothes. "He is doing well," she said, her voice low. She did not look at him. "Good," Luke said. He sat on a rock nearby, not too close. "We need to talk." "We are talking—" "I cannot stay here," Luke said. She finally looked up, her eyes flashing. "Oh, the prisoner wishes to leave. Where will you go back to McGraw? Will you bring him our thanks for your medical supplies?" "No," Luke said, his voice sharp. "I am going back to Dry Creek. I have to. If I do not, he will know for certain I am with you. He will send his entire column. He will not stop until this canyon is red." She stood up, the wet buckskin in her hand. "So you will ride back, and what will you tell him? That you were lost, that you were hunting? He will not believe you. He will hang you." "That is my problem," Luke said. "But I have a bigger one. You are all starving. My hiding here does not change that. Little Fox will heal, but the others will not. I want to make a deal." "A deal?" she sneered. The white man's favorite word, after treaty and lie. "I will go back," Luke said, ignoring her. "I will tell McGraw I found nothing, that I was thrown from my horse and lost my gear. He will not believe me, but it will buy us time, and I will continue to bring the food, the bread, the milk, but I will bring more. Flour, salt, bacon, whatever I can buy from Martha and Carrie." Tana's eyes narrowed. "In exchange for what?" "Scout." "My brother's life, you already have our thanks." "In exchange for yours," Luke said. "You and your warriors. You cannot raid the settlers. You cannot attack the freight wagons. You cannot touch a single civilian in or around Dry Creek." "You ask us to starve quietly," she said, her voice rising. "I am asking you not to give McGraw the excuse he needs." Luke stood, his voice, for the first time, matching hers in intensity. "He wants you to attack. He is praying for it. He set a fire in town to blame you. Do you not see, if you raid, he gets to be a hero. He gets to protect the town. He gets to bring in the cannons. But if you are peaceful, if his savage enemy refuses to fight, he is just a man with a map and an empty complaint. You will starve his war, and I will feed your children." She stared at him, the logic of his words warring with the pride in her heart. He was right. McGraw needed a monster. He was asking her to deny him one. "Go," she said, her voice flat. "Go back to your town. Bring your food. But know this, the first soldier who follows you, I will kill, and then I will kill you." "Fair enough," Luke said. He returned to Dry Creek looking like a ghost. He had walked the last 5 miles. Having lost his horse, he stumbled into Martha's store, his clothes torn, his face haggard. "My God, Luke!" she whispered, pulling him into the back room. "I thought you were dead. The whole town is buzzing. McGraw has a sergeant out looking for you, with orders to shoot on sight if you resisted." Just give me the supplies, Martha," Luke panted, his ribs on fire. "The usual, but double it, and add a side of bacon and 3 tins of coffee." Martha stared at him, her eyes filling with a terrible understanding. "Luke, you are feeding them. Are you not the Comanche?" Luke just looked at her, his face grim. "He will hang you, Luke," she hissed, grabbing his arm. "This is not a game. This is treason. He will put a rope around your neck." "I know," Luke said, his voice gentle. He put his hand over hers. "Martha, if I do not, who will?" She packed his bags, her hands shaking. He paid her, and left, a pariah in his own town. The supply drops became more frequent, more dangerous. Luke rode a thin, dangerous line. He met with McGraw, fed him a story of a concussion and amnesia, a story McGraw did not believe for a second. The colonel just watched him, his eyes like a snake's, waiting for him to make a mistake. The meetings at the cottonwood tree changed. Tana was always there. She no longer hid on the ridge. She would stand 20 yards away, her bow in her hand, her knife on her belt. Their conversations were short, clipped. "More soldiers at the fort," Luke would say, dropping the heavy sacks. "They ride south," she would reply. "The railroad men are buying cattle, bad ones, for cheap. The grass is dry." But the conversations grew. He asked her the name for the hawk that circled overhead. She asked him why salt came in a box. He learned she had a dry, sharp wit. She learned he was not as stupid as he looked. One evening, he was late. A storm was brewing, and he had been delayed by a patrol. He was riding hard when the shot rang out. It was not aimed at him. It was aimed at a deer, just inside the valley. He saw 2 trappers, new to the area, their rifles smoking. And then he saw Tana, frozen, not 50 yards from them. She had been checking her own snares. She was trapped. Luke did not think. He spurred his horse, yelling, firing his pistol into the air. Get out, Army Patrol Comancheros! Get!" The trappers cursed, startled, and fled. But one, angry at losing his kill, fired a parting shot. Luke felt a hot, searing pain tear across his side. He gasped, but kept riding, grabbing Tana's arm. "Get on!" he roared. She leapt onto the back of his horse, light as a cat. He rode them hard into the canyon, the thunder of the storm covering their escape. He made it to the shelter of a small cave before the world started to go dark. He slid from the horse, his side a sheet of fire. "You are hit," Tana said, her voice flat, but her eyes wide with panic. "It is just a graze." Luke lied, leaning against the cave wall, but when he pulled his hand away, it was covered in blood. The rain started, a cold driving sheet. They were trapped. "I need to see it," she said, her voice all business now. "I am fine." "You are a terrible liar," she said. She grabbed the hem of his bloody shirt. "This must come off." "I can do it," he said, his fingers fumbling with the buttons. But he was dizzy, his sides screaming. "Stop being a child," she snapped. She pulled her knife. Luke flinched. "What are you doing?" "Saving your stupid white man's life," she muttered. She did not cut him, but used the flat of the blade to pop the buttons, one by one, a sharp, efficient series of snaps. He was bare-chested. The air in the cave was suddenly thick, hot. They were inches apart. He could smell the rain in her hair, the scent of sage and something else. Something uniquely her. She was all angles and lean muscle, her face set in a frown of concentration. She leaned in to inspect the wound. It was a long, ugly gash along his ribs, bleeding freely but not by some miracle, deep enough to be fatal. Her hair brushed his chest. He could feel her breath, warm and moist, against his skin. He grit his teeth, his entire body tensing. He was acutely aware of her hand, resting on his hip for balance. He was aware of the curve of her neck as she bent her head, the smooth, copper skin. She looked up. Her work stalled. Her eyes, so close, were no longer hard. They were deep, confused. She was close enough to kiss. He was close enough to touch. He could see a small, faded scar just above her collarbone. The moment stretched, held captive by the sound of the rain and their own ragged breathing. Luke saw her swallow. He saw her gaze drop to his mouth. He was the first to look away. "You should patch it," he said, his voice a low croak. Tana blinked, as if waking from a dream. The hardness snapped back into her face. She sat back on her heels, the distance between them suddenly a cold ocean. "Yes," she said, her voice clipped. She pulled a pouch from her belt, her movements jerky. "You are lucky. It missed the bone. She packed the wound with herbs that stung like fire, her touch no longer gentle, but efficient and rough. They sat in silence for a long time, the tension a third person in the cave. "You should not have done that," she said, staring into the rain. "Which part?" Luke asked, his side throbbing. "The yelling or the getting shot part?" "You risked your life," she said. "For me, you are a fool." "That makes two of us," Luke said. "You were standing in the open." "I was hunting." "You were about to be hunted." He looked at her. "You are not the only one with something to protect. Tana." She turned her head, her black hair shielding her face. "You protect nothing. Scout, you are a man of guilt. You feed us because of your ghosts. You saved me because you are stupid. That is not trust. That is not loyalty. It is just more guilt." "Maybe," Luke said, the pain making him reckless. "Or maybe I am just tired of watching good people die. You included." She had no answer for that. They just sat, listening to the storm. Two enemies trapped by a single bullet, the air between them charged with blood and a new, terrible, unspoken thing. The fragile truce Luke had built was as thin as creek ice in winter. It was shattered by the arrival of the bigwigs from the east, the railroad company, in partnership with Colonel Silas McGraw, called a town meeting. They held it in the center of Dry Creek, on a hastily built wooden platform. Luke stood at the back of the crowd, his mended ribs aching. He listened to a man in a silk vest and pocket watch talk about civilization. He talked about progress and manifest destiny. And then he pointed to the valley. "This great iron road will connect our nation," the man boomed, his voice oily. "It will bring prosperity to Dry Creek. All that stands in our way is a small band of savage marauders, thieves who refuse to accept the hand of progress." A few men in the crowd, railroad employees and McGraw's soldiers, cheered. The townsfolk, Martha and Sheriff Carver included, just looked uneasy. "But I assure you," the silk vest continued, "Colonel McGraw and the United States Army have given us their full assurance. The Comanche problem will be dealt with, the valley will be cleared, and the tracks will be laid." "That land is not empty," Luke's voice cut through the applause. The crowd went silent. Every head turned to look at him. The man on the platform blinked, his smile freezing. Colonel McGraw, standing at the side of the platform, turned his head slowly, his eyes boring into Luke. "That land belongs to them," Luke said, his voice hard and clear, pitching it so all could hear. "They are not marauders. They are families. They are the ones who were here first." "That sounds like treason. Mr. Harding," the railroad man sputtered. "It sounds like the truth," Luke shot back. "You call them thieves, but who is signing deeds for land that was never theirs to sell? Who is bringing the guns?" McGraw stepped forward. "That is enough. Harding," his voice was soft, but carried a deadly chill. "You are drunk or a fool, or perhaps, as we have all begun to suspect, a sympathizer." He looked at the crowd. "This man is a disgraced army scout. His words are poison. He consorts with the very savages who would burn your homes." He motioned to two soldiers. "See Mr. Harding home. Ensure he stays there." Luke felt hands grab his arms. He did not resist. He had said his piece. He had drawn his line in the dust. As they dragged him away, he saw McGraw's thin smile. The colonel was pleased. Luke had just made himself an outcast. He had made himself the enemy. 2 nights later, the fire bell rang. A column of thick, oily smoke was rising from the edge of town. The feed and grain warehouse, the one that held the railroad supplies, was engulfed in flames. "Comanche!" "It was the Comanche," a man yelled, pointing to the hills. "I saw them, a dozen of them, all in paint." Luke, who had slipped his guards an hour earlier, was already there, hidden in the shadows. He had been on his way to the valley, his saddlebags loaded. He watched the chaos. McGraw was magnificent. He was on his horse instantly, directing his soldiers, calming the panicked townsfolk. "They have shown their true colors," he roared over the crackle of the flames. "They have attacked us. They have declared war." But Luke was not watching McGraw. He was watching the ground. He moved closer, keeping to the darkness. He found the tracks, just as the witness had said. But they were wrong. The boot prints were from standard-issue cavalry boots, worn at the heel, not the soft, worn moccasins a Comanche warrior would wear. He found a dropped casing, 4470, a government rifle, not a bow. Then he saw one of the witnesses talking to McGraw's sergeant. He was a new man in town, a hard-eyed drifter Luke had seen spending money at the saloon. He held his rifle loosely, butt down, in a way that was pure cowboy, not Comanche. It was a lie. The whole thing was a lie. McGraw had burned his own supplies to win his war. Luke slipped away from the fire and rode hard for the valley. He found Tana at the cottonwood tree. She was already on edge. The smoke was visible for miles. "They are blaming you," Luke said, his voice grim as he dropped the supplies. "A warehouse. Fire. They say it was your warriors." Tana's face, in the moonlight, was a mask of fury. "He dares, he burns his own village and names us." It was a setup, a false flag. He needed an excuse. "He will have one," she hissed, her hand gripping her knife. "If he wants a war, I will give him one. He wants to see a Comanche attack, we will ride tonight. We will burn his fort. We will show him what a real fire looks like." "No," Luke grabbed her arm. She was vibrating with rage. "Tana, listen to me. That is what he wants. He is waiting for you to retaliate. He has telegraphed the general, telling him he is under attack by a hostile force. If you ride now, you are proving him right. You will be riding into a trap." "And if I do nothing?" she cried, tearing her arm from his grasp. "If I sit here, he wins. He calls me a murderer, and I do nothing. My people are starving, and he plays games with fire." "I know," Luke said, his voice softer. "I know. But old Naya was right. You cannot fight this way. Don't shed blood. It only feeds his lies." Tana stared at him, her chest heaving. She was trapped. He was trapped. "Get out," she whispered. "Get out of my sight. Your white man's world is all lies." She turned and ran, disappearing into the rocks, leaving him alone with the smell of smoke and the promise of death. Back in her camp, the argument was brief and terrible. Tana, fueled by her rage, demanded they strike back. The older warriors, their pride stung by the accusation, agreed. Only old Naya stood against them. "You are children," she said, her voice thin but sharp. "You see the fire, and you run toward it, like moths. He has laid a snare. Tana, he has baited it with your pride. If you attack, he pulls the rope. Our people die." "If we do not, we die anyway," Tana retorted. "We die of hunger, or we die of shame." "There is a third way," the old woman said, looking at the sky. "To be the rock, to be the water. The rock does not move. The water finds its own path. He cannot make a war with no enemy. Wait, a change is coming. The wind is rising." The wind had been rising all day. Luke felt it on his ride back, a hot, dry southern wind that carried the taste of grit. By the time he reached the edge of the valley for his next supply run, 2 days later, the sky was a sick, yellow-brown. The air was still, too still. He was on a high, sandy ridge, a shortcut he used to avoid patrols. When the world went dark, it was not a storm. It was an explosion. A wall of sand and dust, 1,000 feet high, hit him with the force of a train. His horse screamed, rearing, blinded. Luke was thrown. He landed hard. The air knocked from his lungs. The world was a screaming, howling chaos of brown. He could not see. He could not breathe. He pulled his bandana over his face, but the fine dust was like acid. He was choking. A hand grabbed his shirt. It was small, strong. It pulled him hard. "This way, fool." It was Tana. He could not see her, but he heard her voice, muffled by the shriek of the wind. She had been tracking him. She was caught, too. She dragged him, half crawling, behind a large outcrop of sandstone, a shallow overhang that offered the barest shelter. They pressed their backs against the rock as the sky fell on them. The noise was deafening, a physical weight. The world was gone. There was only this tiny pocket of refuge, the stinging, suffocating dust, and the two of them. They sat shoulder to shoulder, not as enemies, not as friends, but as two living things trying not to be buried alive. Hours passed. They did not speak. There was nothing to say. As the light inside their dust-choked bubble began to fade from yellow to a deep, dark red, the wind finally abated, its roar dropping to a whine. They were caked in grit. It was in their hair, their teeth, their eyes. Tana was the first to speak, her voice a dry rasp. "You are still alive, Scout. You are a hard man to get rid of." "You are welcome," Luke coughed, spitting out a mouthful of mud. She looked out at the red, alien landscape. The storm had passed, but it had left a deep, unnerving silence. "It will come back," she said, her voice small, not the voice of a warrior. "No, it is moving north," Luke said. "We just have to wait for the air to clear." She was quiet for a long time. He looked at her. Her shoulders were slumped. Her warrior's pride was gone, scoured away by the wind. "Old Naya was right," she whispered. The wind came. She turned to him, her eyes dark and hollow in the red gloom. "It does not matter if McGraw wins. We are already dead." "What are you talking about?" Luke said. "We are alive. The storm is passing." "The storm does not matter," she said, her voice flat, all the fire gone. "I was angry. I wanted to fight him, but it is useless. The buffalo are gone. The children are sick. This storm, it will have buried the spring. It will have killed the last of the rabbits. We are disappearing. My people are ghosts. We are just walking shadows, waiting for the wind to blow us away." He had never heard her like this. The confession of her deepest fear, her profound, absolute despair, hit him harder than the storm. He saw the truth in it. He, with his bread and milk, was just a man putting a bandage on a dying body. Back in Dry Creek, the storm had shaken more than just the dust. Sheriff Tom Carver sat in his office, listening to the wind howl, and looked at the stack of reports on his desk. He was a simple man. He believed in the law, but McGraw's law felt wrong. He had a new report from a patrol: no survivors found at Harding's ranch, presumed lost in the storm. And another: feed store fire officially ruled as arson by Comanche hostiles. But Carver had been at the fire. He, too, had seen the boot prints, and he had just received a wire, a bounty. Colonel McGraw was offering $50, in gold, from the railroad's security fund, to any man who could lead his troops to the Comanche breeding ground. Not an official army bounty, a private one. Carver put his feet on his desk. He was not a fool. You do not put a private bounty on an act of war. You put a bounty on something you want to remove, quietly. This whole thing stank. It stank worse than the feed fire. And Luke Harding, a man he had known for 5 years as quiet and decent, was caught in the middle of it. The storm hit the Comanche camp with the force of a hammer. The wind tore at the already frayed lodge skins. The air became unbreathable. Sand and grit buried their meager food supplies, filled their water skins. When the red dawn finally came, the camp was a ruin, and 2 of the children were missing. Luke and Tana arrived to the sound of wailing. A mother, her face streaked with dust and tears, was clawing at a sand drift. Tana's despair vanished, replaced by the sharp command of a leader. She began organizing, shouting orders, her voice raw but strong. Luke did not wait. He saw the small, terrified tracks, already filling in. He followed them. his scout's mind taking over. The children had been scared. They would have run from the wind, not into it. He headed for a small, rocky cleft he had noted earlier. He found them huddled together. One small girl, no more than 6, and her even smaller brother. The boy was fine, just terrified. But the girl, she was not moving. She had fallen, and a small drift of sand had covered her face. Luke ran. He pulled her free. She was limp, her skin blue, not breathing. "Give her to me," Tana screamed, running up behind him. No time. Luke laid the girl down. He put his mouth over hers, pinched her nose, and blew. 1, 2. He pressed on her small chest, just as the army doctor had shown him. 1, 2, 3. "What are you doing?" Tana yelled, ready to pull him off. "I am saving her," he growled, and blew again. "Breathe, damn you, breathe!" On the 4th breath, the girl coughed, a weak, sand-filled gasp. She spit up mud and water and then began to wail. A beautiful, terrible sound. Luke sat back, his entire body shaking. He picked her up and handed her to Tana. Tana just stared at him. The living child clutched to her chest. She said nothing. She did not have to. The trust in her eyes was more powerful than any words. That night, the camp was subdued, but it was not broken. They had lost lodges, but not lives. Luke sat by a small fire, his side aching, his lungs raw. He had been accepted, for now. He was no longer a prisoner. He was the man who had breathed life back into their child. Tana sat across from him. The silence was different now. Not hostile, just full. "You should not stay," she said, her voice low. "McGraw has a price on this camp. He will have a price on your head, too, when he finds you are not dead." "I am not leaving," Luke said. He looked at her face, softened by the firelight. He saw the strength there, but also the despair she had shown him in the cave. "I know a place," he said, his voice quiet. "Up north, near the Bighorns. It is empty land, good water, good grass, no railroad, no army. No one would find you." She looked at him, confused. "What are you saying?" He had not meant to say it. The words just came, clumsy and rough. "I am saying, you cannot win here. Tana, he will not stop. He will bring the cannons. He will kill you all. You, little fox, the children I saved." He leaned forward. "I can get you out. I can lead you. Just you and your brother. And maybe a few others. The children. We could start over." "Start over," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. He was in too deep now. "Yes, I have some money saved. We could build a cabin. I could protect you." He reached out, his hand hovering, not quite daring to touch her. "Tana, come with me. Be my wife. We can leave this. We can be safe." The silence that followed was absolute. Tana's face, which had been so open, closed like a stone fist. She stood up. When she spoke, her voice was not the rasp of the storm or the whisper of the cave. It was the voice of the warrior on the ridge. It was steel. "My wife," she said, the words dripping with a cold fury he had never heard. "Your wife. You ask me to abandon my people, to leave old Naya, to leave the graves of my family. You ask me to run so I can be safe in your cabin." "Tana, I just meant—" Luke scrambled to his feet. "You understand nothing," she spat, her hand gesturing to the wounded, struggling camp around them. "This is my life. These are my people. They are dying. Yes, but we will die here, on our land, as a people, not as one woman, hiding in a white man's house." "I was trying to save you," he yelled back, his own frustration boiling over. "You cannot save me," she shouted. "I do not need to be saved by you. I need an ally. I need a warrior. And you are a coward. You are still the same man from the massacre. You see death, and your first thought is to run. To save one person. To save yourself. She stepped close, her eyes blazing, all the fire he had ever seen in her, and more. You do not know what loyalty is. You do not know what a heart is. You think it is something you can trade for safety. My heart is here, in this dirt, with them, and you are not welcome in it. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness, leaving Luke alone by the fire, the word coward ringing in his ears. He had offered her his future, and she had thrown it back in his face as an insult. He had tried to save one, and in doing so, he had betrayed them all. The space between them was no longer filled with tension. It was a cold, empty canyon. Luke's world had shrunk to the word coward. It was a brand on his soul. And Tana had been the one to press the hot iron. He rode back to Dry Creek, his movements stiff, his face a mask of defeat. He was the man she said he was. He had offered to save her, but only by destroying her. The realization left him hollow. He went to Martha's store, his eyes dark, his voice a rasp. He bought flour, milk, and salt. He no longer felt like a savior, or even an ally. He felt like a fool, performing a ritual that meant nothing. He rode to the cottonwood tree, not caring about the risk. He was tired. Let McGraw find him. Let it all end. He was not prepared to see Little Fox. The boy stepped out from the rocks, his face grim, his small hand on his knife. Tana is angry, Little Fox said, his voice a low hiss. He did not trust Luke. Not anymore. We are all angry, Luke said, his voice empty. He held out the sack of flour. Take it. I am angry, too, boy, but not at you. The voice was cold, smooth. It was not Luke. It was not Little Fox. Colonel Silas McGraw stepped out from the boulders, his pistol level. 4 soldiers in blue uniforms fanned out behind him, their rifles raised. Do not move, traitor, McGraw said, his voice almost pleasant. Little Fox lunged, a wild, desperate animal. A soldier caught him, slamming the butt of his rifle into the boy's stomach. Little Fox collapsed, gasping. Let him go, McGraw, Luke said, his hand moving toward his own gun. Ah, McGraw wagged a finger. I think not. I have been patient. Harding, I have watched you. Watch you play nursemaid to these savages. Watch you feed them, meet with them. You are a slow-witted man. Luke, but I am not. He motioned to his men. Take the boy. He can run back to his sister. He smiled, a thin, reptilian expression. Tell her I have the bait. The trap is set. The soldiers let Little Fox up. The boy was crying, his face twisted in fear and rage. He looked at Luke. I will tell her. He spat, and he ran, disappearing into the rocks. And now, you, McGraw said. 2 soldiers grabbed Luke, pulling his arms behind him. You are coming home. They did not take him to the fort. They took him to the old livery stable, the one at the edge of town, the one the army used for its horses. They beat him. They did not use their fists, which was almost a kindness. They used their rifle butts and their boots. They were professionals. They beat him until he was a gasping, bloody mess in the straw, and then they left him. He lay there for hours, tasting blood and manure. His world was a red haze of pain. At dusk, the door opened. Colonel McGraw entered, his boots immaculate. He was carrying a lantern, and he set it on a barrel, the yellow light painting the stall. Harding, he sighed, as if disappointed in a slow pupil. This is all so unnecessary. You and I, we are civilized men. They are not. He unrolled a map and spread it on the barrel. It was the map Luke had carried. One last chance, for your old uniform, for your own kind. Where is the camp? Put 1X on this map, and I make it stop. I will tell the general you were working for me, a double agent. I will give you a horse, a new rifle, and you can ride out of this territory a free man. Luke tried to sit up, his ribs screaming. He managed to prop himself on one elbow. He looked at the map, and then at McGraw. He spit a bloody tooth onto the straw. "Go to hell, Colonel." McGraw's face did not change. He just nodded slowly. "I see." He folded the map. "I was afraid you would say that. You are a romantic. Harding, you still believe in things. I believe in results." He turned to the guards at the door. "Take him outside, to the corral. He refuses my hospitality. Show him some of yours." They dragged him out of the stable and into the moonlight. They tied his raw wrists to the high central post of the main corral. He was forced to stand. His body slumped, his feet barely touching the ground. "No water," McGraw ordered, his voice echoing in the cold night air. "And get a horse, a fresh one." A soldier brought a big, nervous sorrel. McGraw patted its neck. "Lunge him, all night. Keep him close to the prisoner." The torture was not the beating. The torture was this: the sun came up, hot and brutal. Luke was tied, exposed. The soldier began to walk the horse in a tight circle around him. The horse, angry and confused, kicked up dust. The thud of its hooves, over and over, was a drumbeat of madness. Dust filled his lungs. The sun baked his skin. His wounds burned. His mouth was a dry husk. The horse circled and circled. Sometimes the soldier would flick the whip, and the horse would rear, its hooves flashing inches from Luke's face. He would not give them the satisfaction of screaming. He slumped, letting the ropes hold his weight, and he disappeared into the pain. Martha Ellis watched from the window of her store. She had seen them tie him up. She had watched all night. She saw the sun hit him. She saw the horse. This was not war. This was savagery, right in the center of her town. She grabbed her shawl and marched across the street. Sheriff Tom Carver was in his office, his boots on his desk, pretending to read a 2-day-old newspaper. "Tom Carver, are you blind?" Martha snapped, her voice shaking with rage. "Morning, Martha. Hot one, is it not?" Carver said, not looking up. "He is torturing him in your town, on your watch. Are you a lawman, or are you just here to sweep up?" Carver put the paper down. His face was gray. "Martha, that is military business. Colonel McGraw has declared Harding a traitor. I have no jurisdiction." "Jurisdiction?" she hissed. "That man is being cooked alive, 20 feet from your door. That is not military business. That is a lynching, a slow one." She leaned on his desk. "I know that man. Tom, he is quiet. He has ghosts. But he is not a bad man. And that colonel, he is evil. I can feel it." Carver looked at his hands. He, too, had seen the boot prints at the feed store fire. He, too, had heard McGraw's men joking about Comanche tricks. "What do you want me to do?" Carver said, his voice low. "Go out there and draw on a United States colonel and his entire patrol. They would cut me down, and they would still kill Harding." "I want you to be the law," she whispered, her anger breaking. "He will be dead by noon." Carver looked out the window. He saw Luke's head slump. He saw the fly-bitten horse, still circling. He stood up abruptly. "I'm riding out. I have to check the East County line. Bandits!" He strapped on his gun belt. He picked up his hat. He walked to the door, where his heavy ring of jail keys hung on a peg. He jangled them. "McGraw has 2 guards on that stable," he said, not looking at her. "They change at midnight, but they keep the back door unlocked for convenience." He walked past her. He stopped at the water trough outside his office. He took a long drink. He wiped his mustache. And he walked away, leaving the heavy ring of keys sitting on the stone edge of the trough, glinting in the morning sun. Tana had watched from a rooftop all night. She had seen them beat him. She had seen them tie him up. She had watched, her heart a cold, dead stone in her chest. This was her fault, her pride, her anger. She had called him a coward, And he had come back here to prove her wrong. To die. Little Fox was beside her. He did not tell, the boy whispered, his voice full of awe. Tana saw Carver walk away. She saw the keys. "It is a trap," she said, her voice a rasp. "The sheriff is one of them. He leaves the keys. We go for them. They shoot us." "Maybe," Little Fox said. "Or maybe he is just a forgetful man." Tana watched the guards. They were bored. They were hot. They were paying more attention to the saloon than to the dying man. She waited until the sun was at its highest. She waited until the guards were changing shifts. In the momentary confusion, she slipped from the roof. She was a ghost. She grabbed the keys. She and Little Fox moved like two snakes, slithering through the alley, into the back of the stable. It was unlocked, just as the sheriff had said. They found the big bay horse Luke had ridden, still in its stall. Tatna put a hand over its muzzle. She slipped a rope into its mouth. Then they moved to the front. The new guards were just settling in. Tana looked at her brother. She pointed. He nodded. Tana stepped out into the sunlight. "Soldier!" she called. The two guards spun, their rifles coming up. They saw a Comanche woman, standing alone. "It is one of them. Shoot her." But Tana was already gone, diving behind a water trough. A bullet splintered the wood. As the guards ran forward, Little Fox burst from the stable door. On the bay, he was bent low, riding hard. "It is a trick," one guard yelled. Turning, Little Fox did not ride away. He rode at the post. He swung his knife, cutting the ropes that held Luke. Luke collapsed to the ground, a dead weight. "Get him!" Tana screamed, emerging from her cover. She had no bow. She had only her knife. She ran at the closest guard. It was madness. It was suicide. But Little Fox, in a move of pure Comanche genius, spun the horse, bent down, and grabbed Luke by the shirt. He was not strong enough to lift him. Tana hit the first guard, her knife finding his arm, his rifle clattering. The second guard turned to shoot her, but Little Fox, with a scream, had spurred the horse. The big bay slammed into the guard, sending him flying. "Now!" Tana yelled. She grabbed Luke's arm. Little Fox grabbed his other. Together, they hauled his limp body, like a sack of grain, onto the horse's back. Tana leapt up behind him, her legs gripping the horse's barrel. "Little Fox!" Little Fox did not wait. He grabbed the horse's mane and swung himself up in front of Tana and Luke. 3 people on one horse, a desperate, impossible trinity. "Ride!" Tana screamed, slapping her brother's back. They burst out of the corral, past a stunned Colonel McGraw, who was just emerging from the saloon. He raised his pistol, his face a mask of fury. Shots rang out, but they were gone, swallowed by the alleys, and then by the open plain. They rode until the horse was trembling, its sides slick with foam. Tana guided them to a place she knew. A hidden slot canyon carved by a forgotten river. A place with a stream and one way in. They fell from the horse. Luke did not move. He was unconscious, his skin on fire. "He is burning," Little Fox said, his voice small. "He is dying." "No," Tana said. Her voice was fierce. "Build a fire, now!" She dragged Luke to the small stream. She tore off his ruined, bloody shirt. His body was a landscape of pain. The bullet wound on his side was torn open. His wrists were raw. His back was purple from the beatings. His chest blistered from the sun. She was a warrior. She knew wounds. She did what old Naya had taught her. She washed him. She cleaned the grit from his skin. She used her own herbs, the ones in her pouch, to pack the angry wound. But the fever was too deep. He began to shake, his teeth chattering in the terrible, violent way of a man whose body was shutting down. The sun had baked him, and now the cold was claiming him. "He is cold," Tana whispered, her own hands shaking. "The fever is in his bones." She looked at her brother. Keep the fire high and turn your back. Do not look." "Sister, do it." Little Fox obeyed. Tana lay down on the hard, cold sand. She pulled Luke, his body shaking apart. Next to her, she wrapped her arms around him. She pulled the single wool blanket over both of them, and she pressed her body against his, her warmth against his fire, her life against his death. She held him, her heart hammering. She felt his ragged, shallow breaths. She felt the violent shudders. She was holding her enemy. She was holding the man she had called a coward. She was holding the man who had not spoken. She held him through the long, cold night, her own body aching, as he mumbled words she could not understand. He mumbled about a girl, a fire, and bread. When he woke, the fever was gone. The world was gray and quiet. He was weak, but he was alive, and he was warm. He realized, with a jolt, that the warmth was Tana. She was still asleep, her head on his shoulder, her body pressed against his. He did not move, he just breathed. She woke with a start, her eyes flying open. She saw him watching her. She pulled away, scrambling to her feet, her face flushed, her hair wild. "You are awake," she said. It was not a question. "You stayed," he whispered. His throat was raw. "You were cold," she said, her voice sharp. She went to the fire, her back to him. Luke propped himself up on one elbow. His body was a single, large, screaming nerve, but his mind was clear. "Tana," he said. She did not turn. "You were right. About me. I am a coward." She turned her head slightly. "I have been running my whole life," he said, his voice cracking. "From the army. From what I saw. What I did not do." He looked at the small fire. "When I asked you to run with me, it was not to save you. It was to save me. I wanted to take you and hide you, so I could feel like I had saved something, so I could look at you and not hate myself. That is the truth." He let out a long, shuddering breath. "Every day I brought bread and milk," he whispered. "I told myself it was for your people, for my guilt, for the ghosts. But it was for me. I was hoping to feed your people, and maybe feed the part of me that still believed in something good." He looked up at her. She was watching him, her face unreadable. "I just wanted to be near you," he confessed. "That is all." She walked to him. She knelt in the sand in front of him. She looked at his bruised face, his raw wrists, his blistered skin. "You are a fool," she said, her voice a low murmur. "A stupid, stubborn, white man fool." She reached out, her hand hesitant, and touched his face. Her fingers were rough, but her touch was gentle. "You think bread and milk can buy back a soul? You think running is the only way to be free?" He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. She leaned closer, until her breath was on his lips. "Every day you brought bread and milk," she whispered. Her English was perfect, clear, a secret she had held close. "Tonight," she said, her dark eyes holding him, "I bring you my heart, if you'll take it." And she kissed him. It was clumsy, a collision of chapped lips and broken spirits. He was too weak to move. He could only receive. His hand came up, weakly, entangled in her hair. She pulled back, looked at him, her eyes searching, and then she kissed him again. This time, it was deep. It was a kiss that held all the unsaid words, the anger, the fear, the storm, the rescue. It was the taste of salt and ash. It was the end of the world, and the beginning of one. She eased him back down onto the blanket, her body shielding him from the cold morning air. Her hands were not clinical, as they had been in the cave. They were exploring. Her fingers traced the new bruises on his chest, the old scar from the trapper's bullet. His own hands, shaking, found the lean, strong muscles of her back. The firelight danced on her skin. He saw the curve of her hip, the strength in her shoulders. It was a slow, desperate discovery. It was not a fire. It was an ember, glowing in the ruins. He kissed the scar above her collarbone. She shivered, her eyes closing, a small sound escaping her throat. They came together not in a rush of passion, but in a slow, desperate claim. It was two broken people, finding a whole, perfect moment in a world that was trying to tear them apart. After, they lay tangled in the wool blanket. The sun was rising, painting the canyon walls red. "I was so afraid," she whispered, her head resting on his chest. He could feel her heart, beating steady against his. "When you asked me to be your wife, I was so angry, but I was afraid that I would say yes." He stroked her hair. "What?" "I have watched you," she said, "from the first day, the man on the ridge. I hated you, but I saw you. You were not like the others. You were broken, like me. I hated you for it, and I wanted you. I was afraid that if I loved you, I would betray my people, betray my blood." Luke held her, his own heart aching. He felt a new strength, a clarity he had never known. "Tana," he said, his voice clear, "I will not ask you to run again." She looked up at him. "I was a coward, not you. I was the one who wanted to run, but I am not running anymore." He held her gaze. "I will not hide. I will stand with you. Your people are my people. We will fight him. Not your way, not his way, our way." She smiled. It was the first time he had ever seen her smile. It was like the sun coming up over the ridge. High above them, on the canyon rim, a small figure watched. Old Naya had followed the trail of the horse, the tracks of the 3-on-1. She had seen the fire. She saw the two figures, wrapped as one. She nodded, her ancient face grim. The spirits had moved. The blood had been spilled, and the blood had been shared. It was the only way. She turned her face to the east. She could smell the smoke from the fort. She could feel the vibration. In the earth of the iron horse, miles away, but coming. "The dawn will bring blood," she murmured to the wind. "The war is here." Colonel Silas McGraw did not wait for the dust to settle. Luke Harding's escape, aided by the very savages he was meant to be betraying, was more than an embarrassment. It was a declaration of war. It had forced his hand. He could no longer wait for Tana to make a mistake. He would manufacture one. He rode out from the fort at the head of a column of 20 men, their blue uniforms crisp, their saddlebags heavy with ammunition. But with him rode another group, a dozen hard-eyed men in buckskins and filth. These were his Comanche, the drifters and hired guns who had set the feed store fire. Today, they wore crude paint on their faces, a mockery of the people they were about to help destroy. In McGraw's breast pocket, tucked inside an oilskin pouch, were the deeds, signed, sealed, and sanctioned by the railroad, giving his personal cattle company grazing rights to the entire valley as soon as it was declared secure. Today, he would secure it. He would ride into the canyon. His men would open fire, and his fake Comanche would create a crossfire of chaos. In the ensuing battle, the real Comanche, caught between two forces, would be annihilated. He would report it as a tragic accident, a railroad survey team caught in a savage dispute, his own men forced to defend themselves. What he did not count on was the rain. For 3 days, a slow, heavy rain had been falling in the high mountains to the north, a place he never looked. The creeks were running high. Luke and Tana raced back to the camp, the single horse breathing hard. Luke was weak, his body a map of pain, but his mind was sharp, fueled by adrenaline and a new, terrible clarity. He was no longer a man of guilt. He was a man with a purpose. They arrived in chaos. The camp was already aware of the rising water. The small, peaceful creek that was their lifeline had swollen into a muddy, roaring monster. It was already licking at the edges of the first lodges. Old Naya was directing the women, her voice thin but strong, as they frantically moved children and elders to higher ground. "Soldiers," Little Fox screamed from his lookout post. "They are coming, many of them." Panic seized the camp. They were trapped, a flood at their backs, an army at their front. "Listen to me." Tana's voice cut through the rising wail of fear. She stood on a boulder, Luke beside her, his hand on her arm for support. But he stood tall. "Do not run, do not scatter, listen." The warriors gathered, their faces grim. "We fight," Stoneface said, his hand on his rifle. "We die here." "No," Luke said, his voice quiet but carrying in the sudden lull. "You will not die. You will not fight them. Not head on. He wants a battle. He has cannons." "What then, white man?" Stoneface sneered. "Do we drown?" "We use this," Luke said, gesturing to the canyon, to the flood, to the new, gleaming iron rails that ran along the far cliff edge. "He is bringing his men along the tracks. He thinks it is a high road. We will make it a trap." He looked at Tana, his eyes locking with hers. He did not give orders. He offered a plan. "He is a soldier. He will be predictable. He will divide his forces. He will send his cavalry to keep you pinned, while his main force—" "He has a train," Tana interrupted, her mind moving with his. "The railroad. They have a supply train. It brings the iron. It brings the soldiers." "A train," Luke said, a slow, terrible smile spreading on his bruised face. "Yes, and a train needs tracks. The plan was desperate. It was madness. It was perfect." They had less than an hour. The evacuation of the camp continued, the women and children climbing to the high caves, hidden and safe, protected by old Naya. But the warriors remained. Luke, his body screaming, worked with Tana and a half-dozen warriors on the railroad tracks. The line ran along a narrow ledge, cut into the canyon wall, with a sheer drop to the now raging creek below. "Not here," Luke panted, his hands raw. "We do not want to derail it. Not with men on it." He was a man who had seen too much death. "We stop it, here, at this bend." He pointed to a section of track just before a high, narrow trestle bridge that spanned a dry ravine. "They will have to slow for the turn. We pull the spikes here. We pull the rail. The train stops. It blocks the track. It splits his army." They worked with a frantic, focused energy. They used lodge poles as levers, their own knives as tools. The steel was heavy, but their desperation was heavier. They pulled the spikes. They loosened the rail, leaving it sitting in place, a metal snake waiting to be uncoiled. As they finished, a whistle echoed down the canyon. "They are coming," Tana said. "Little Fox," Luke gasped, pulling the boy close. "The wire, the telegraph, it runs along the poles. You are the fastest. Cut it in a dozen places, no reinforcements, no reports. Go!" Little Fox nodded, his eyes bright with a terrible, adult understanding, and he vanished. "And you?" Tana asked Luke. "McGraw will be on that train," Luke said. "Or he will be at the head of his men. He is a vain man. I'm going to find him." "We will fight," Tana said. She pulled 2 horses from the small herd, pressing the reins of one into Luke's hand. "Like you said, our way." The battle began not with a bang, but with a screech. The train, a small engine pushing 2 flatbeds loaded with soldiers, rounded the bend. The engineer saw the displaced rail too late. He slammed on the brake. The train shuddered, its wheels screaming, and stopped, its metal nose not 10 feet from the gap. The soldiers on board, thrown into a pile, cursed and scrambled for their rifles. They were trapped on the narrow ledge. At the same moment, McGraw, at the head of his ground cavalry, entered the mouth of the canyon. He saw the stopped train, and he saw the floodwaters. His face twisted. "They are in the rocks," he roared. "Flush them out, Sergeant. Take your men." The sergeant led his patrol forward, just as Tana and her warriors, on horseback, burst from a side canyon. They were not charging the soldiers. They were charging their horses. They rode like demons, screaming, firing arrows. Not at the men, but at their mounts. The cavalry, trained for prairie warfare, dissolved in the face of this chaotic, close-quarters attack. Horses reared, men fell. It was a brilliant, bloody confusion. At the edge of town, Sheriff Tom Carver had gathered 5 men, 5 decent, quiet men who did not like what their town was becoming. A store owner, a blacksmith, 2 ranchers. They were not a posse. They were witnesses. "We are just going to observe. Boys," Carver said, his voice flat, "make sure the colonel files his reports properly." But when they reached the canyon mouth, they saw it was not a battle. It was a massacre. Carver saw the Comanche, the painted white men, dismount. They were not fighting Tana's warriors. They were taking cover in the rocks, and they were firing at McGraw's own soldiers. They were shooting men in the back, creating a crossfire, escalating the battle into a slaughter. "My God," the blacksmith whispered, his face pale. "He is killing his own—" McGraw, his face black with rage, was trying to get to the train. He saw Carver and his men. "Sheriff," he bellowed, "join the fight, we are under attack." Sheriff Tom Carver looked at the hired killer who had just shot a young blue-coated corporal. He looked at Tana, a lone woman, fighting a dozen men. He looked at the chaos. He was a man of the law, and the law had just become very, very clear. "You heard him. Boys," Carver said, his voice ringing with a new authority. He unholstered his pistol. "Join the fight." He aimed, his hand steady, and shot the painted-faced killer in the chest. "The colonel is a traitor," Carver roared. "Arrest him." The townsfolk, stunned for a second, followed his lead. They were not soldiers, but they were good shots. They opened fire on McGraw's Comanche gang, turning the tide in a single righteous volley. Luke was not on a horse. He was climbing. He had seen McGraw. The colonel, cut off from his men, had abandoned his horse and was scrambling up the rocky embankment toward the train, toward the trestle bridge. He was trying to escape. Luke met him on the tracks. The world shrank to a narrow ribbon of wood and iron, suspended 50 feet over a dry, rocky ravine. The roar of the flood and the pop of gunfire faded. "Harding," McGraw snarled, his uniform torn, his face streaked with sweat. He raised his pistol. "You should have stayed dead, you traitorous dog." "This is not my land you are stealing." "Colonel," Luke said, his own pistol in his hand. He was weak, his hands were shaking, but he was steady. "This is not your war." "It is my war, it is my valley," McGraw screamed, and he fired. The bullet tore through the muscle of Luke's shoulder. The impact was a white-hot agony. Luke stumbled, his pistol clattering from his numb fingers. McGraw smiled, a predator's smile, and he walked forward, leveling his pistol for the killing shot. "You love these savages," he sneered. "You can die with them." He was aiming at Luke's head, but out of the corner of his eye, he saw a shadow. Tana. She was on the rocks below, her bow raised, the arrow aimed at his heart. McGraw laughed. A short, sharp bark. He grabbed the front of Luke's shirt, hauling his wounded body up. He pressed the muzzle of his pistol to Luke's temple. "Shoot him, girl," he taunted. "Shoot through him. It is the only way kill your lover." Tana froze, her face a mask of agony. She had the shot, but she could not take it. Luke looked at her. He saw her pain. He saw her choice. And he knew what he had to do. He was not a coward, not anymore. With his last ounce of strength, he did not fight. He fell. He grabbed McGraw's gun hand with his good arm and used his full weight, pulling them both forward. McGraw roared in surprise. He fired, the bullet singing past Luke's ear. And then they were both off the track. They were falling. But Luke's good hand, bloody and raw, caught a wooden railroad tie. His wounded shoulder screamed, a blinding nova of pain. He was hanging, just barely, and he was not alone. McGraw's hand was clamped in a death grip on his belt. They dangled, two men suspended over the rocks. Luke's grip was failing. The pain was too much. "Luke!" Tana's scream cut through the air. He looked up. She was on the trestle above him. She had dropped her bow. She was on her stomach, her arm stretched down, her hand just inches from his. He looked at McGraw. The colonel was staring at him, his eyes wide with terror. "Do not," McGraw wheezed. "Do not let me fall." Luke looked back at Tana. Her face was a prayer. Her hand was there. She had to choose. Let them both fall, and the war would be over. McGraw would be gone, or save the man she loved, and let the monster live. Her choice was instant. It was never a choice at all. "Take my hand!" she screamed. Luke looked at McGraw. "She is not choosing," he grunted. "I am." He let go of the railroad tie, but he did not fall. Tana's hand, small but strong as steel, had caught his wrist. She had him. She screamed, her muscles straining, as she took his full weight, and McGraw's. Luke's other hand was still on his belt. McGraw was still clamped to him. "Tana," he gasped. "I cannot let him go." "I have you," she screamed. Luke looked down at the man who had tried to kill them all, and he let go. He did not let go of Tana. He did not let go of the trestle. He let go of McGraw. His hand, the one the colonel was gripping, shot up, breaking the man's hold. McGraw fell. He did not scream. He just fell, a heavy weight, crashing onto the rocks below. He landed with a sickening, final crunch. He did not move. And then he did. A low, terrible groan. He was alive. Tana pulled. Her muscles burned. Luke, his shoulder shattered, used his feet to find purchase on the rock wall. Together, they clawed their way back. He collapsed onto the tracks, his body broken, but his spirit whole. The gunfire had stopped. In the sudden, ringing silence, Sheriff Tom Carver's voice boomed. He was standing on a boulder, a scrap of white cloth tied to his rifle. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" he yelled. "Colonel McGraw is relieved of his command. He is under arrest for treason and the murder of United States soldiers." The blue-coated men, confused, leaderless, and seeing their Comanche enemies being tied up by townsfolk, lowered their weapons. Tana did not hear any of it. She was on her knees, cradling Luke's head in her lap, her tears washing the blood and grit from his face. "You are a fool," she whispered, her voice breaking. "A stupid, brave fool." "But I am not a coward," he mumbled, his eyes fluttering. "Not anymore." "No," she said, pressing a kiss to his feverish forehead. "You are not. You are mine." The railroad was stopped. The war, for today, was over. Luke Harding's world, for the first week, was a mist of pain and herb-scented sleep. He drifted in and out of consciousness in Tana's lodge. He felt the sting of old Naya's poultices, the gentle, constant pressure of Tana's hand on his brow, cooling his fever. He heard the sounds of the camp rebuilding, the rhythmic thud of a lodgepole being set, the distant laughter of the children he had saved. But for the first time in 10 years, he did not hear the screams. He did not smell the gunpowder or the burning hide of his nightmares. When he slept, he did not see the little girl with the accusing eyes. He dreamed, instead, of a wide, open prairie, endless and blue. He was on his buckskin, and Tana was on her pinto, and they were riding. Not running, just riding, with the wind in their faces and a sky that held no borders. He woke one morning, the light clear and sharp. The pain in his shoulder was a dull, manageable ache. Tana was sitting by the lodge entrance, mending a piece of leather, the morning light framing her in gold. She looked up, her hand stilling. "You are back," she said, her voice soft. "I do not think I ever left," he whispered, his throat dry. The world outside their canyon had been turned upside down. Sheriff Tom Carver, his duty finally clear, had ridden to the nearest telegraph office, the one not controlled by the railroad. He had sent 2 messages. One, to the territorial governor, reporting an army officer, Colonel Silas McGraw, for treason, murder, and conspiracy. The second, to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, reporting a band of peaceful Comanche, starving and under illegal attack. It took 3 weeks, but the government, smelling a scandal that involved the Army and its largest railroad contract, finally acted. 2 men arrived on the stagecoach. They were not soldiers. They wore black wool suits, derby hats, and expressions of grim, bureaucratic importance. They were federal commissioners. They held their inquiry not in the fort, but in the center of Dry Creek, in the town hall. The room was packed. Colonel Silas McGraw was there, his arm in a sling, his legs broken from the fall, his face a mask of pale, arrogant fury. He was under guard. The railroad men were there, their silk vests looking suddenly cheap, their lawyers whispering in their ears. Sheriff Tom Carver was the first to speak. He spoke in a flat monotone, laying out the facts, the boot prints at the fire, the private bounty, the testimony of the hired guns his men had captured. He laid out the truth, piece by piece, like he was laying cards on a table. Martha Ellis spoke next. She did not speak of facts. She spoke of justice. She spoke of the cruelty she had witnessed, of the man attached to the post, of the fear McGraw had bred in their town. Her voice, shaking with a righteous anger, was the conscience of Dry Creek. Then they called Luke Harding. He walked in, his arm in a sling made of a soft Comanche shawl, Tana and old Naya walking behind him. The room went silent. The townsfolk stared. Tana did not look at them. She stood at the back of the room, her face impassive. A guardian. Luke stood before the commissioners. He did not yell. He did not accuse. He just told his story. He told them about the massacre. 10 years prior, he told them about the bread and the milk. He told them about desperation, hunger. He told them about the ambush that was a warning, and the fire that was a lie. He spoke for an hour. When he was done, there was not a sound in the room. The verdict, when it came a week later, was a thing of the world, a bitter, necessary compromise. Colonel Silas McGraw was found guilty of conspiracy, conduct unbecoming, and the murder of his own men. He was stripped of his rank and sent east, in irons, to face a military tribunal. He would not hang, but he would never see the sun as a free man again. The railroad's contract was called into review. The deeds McGraw carried were declared fraudulent, and the new agreement was drawn. It was not a true victory. The Comanche were not given back to the world, but they were given a piece of it. The treaty, signed by the commissioners and marked by old Naya's thumbprint, guaranteed them rights to the southern half of the valley. It was their land, sovereign, protected. The railroad, the commissioners decreed, would be built, but it would not go through the valley. It would be rerouted, at enormous expense, north around the ancestral burial grounds. Justice, Luke learned, was not a bolt of lightning. It was a slow, difficult, grinding thing, but it had, for once, ground in their favor. The change in Dry Creek was just as slow. The fear of the Comanche, bred for a generation, did not die overnight, but it began to fade. The first sign was when Tana and 3 warriors rode into town, not as raiders, but as customers. They rode to Martha Ellis's store. The street went quiet. Men reached for guns they no longer wore. Tana dismounted, her back straight. She walked into the store. Martha, her face wreathed in a smile, was waiting. "About time you came," she said. "I have set aside that red calico you were asking about." Martha had cleared a whole corner of her store. "Fair trade," the new sign read. "Comanche furs, hides, and beadwork. No whiskey, no cheats." One by one, the people of Dry Creek, seeing that the world had not ended, began to trade. The ranchers found the Comanche ponies were the best they had ever seen. The women discovered that Comanche herbs could cure a cough better than any town doctor. They were not friends. Not yet, but they were neighbors. And every morning, Luke Harding rode from his small cabin. He no longer lived on the edge of town, but had moved his home, piece by piece, to the edge of the valley. And every morning, he rode into the Comanche camp. He still brought the bread and milk, but it was different now. He was not sneaking, not a ghost. He rode in the bright sunlight. The children of the camp, their faces now round and full, would run to him, screaming his name, laughing, knowing he had pockets full of rock candy from Martha's store. He would hand the sack of flour and the fresh milk to Tana, who would be waiting for him by their lodge. And he would kiss her, a slow, easy kiss, in front of the whole camp. The ritual of guilt had become a ritual of love. The offering was no longer an apology. It was a promise. One morning, as the first light touched the peaks, old Naya called them. She had built a small, sacred fire in the center of the camp. The air was cold, sharp with the smell of sage and pine. It was just the three of them. "The worlds have shifted," old Naya said, her voice a dry rustle. "The lines are blurred. A new path must be made." She looked at them, her ancient eyes seeing things Luke could only guess at. "A man cannot have two hearts. A woman cannot have two spirits. They must be bound as one." She held out her hands. In one, she held a single red-tailed hawk feather. In the other, a small, beautifully woven shawl, the color of the earth. "You are the sky," she said to Luke, handing him the feather. "The protector, the one who sees. You are the earth," she said to Tana, handing her the shawl. "The foundation, the one who holds." They stood before the fire. Luke, his hands shaking, tied the feather into Tana's long, black hair. Tana, her movements slow and deliberate, wrapped the shawl around his wounded shoulder, covering the sling, covering his scar. "It is done," old Naya said. "Your spirits are tied. Do not let them unravel." There was no priest. There were no rings. But as Luke looked at Tana, her face soft in the dawn, the hawk feather bright against her hair, he knew he had never been more married, or more truly bound, in his entire life. They walked to the top of the ridge, the camp waking up below them. They stood, side by side, his good arm wrapped around her waist. Luke looked at the scar on the northern landscape, the new line of the railroad, winding its way west. Forced to respect the land it crossed. He looked down at the camp, at the smoke rising from the lodges, at the sound of children laughing, at the sight of his own horse, tied next to Tana's pinto. He felt a sudden, sharp pang of his old guilt. "Tana," he said, his voice quiet, "do you ever regret it?" She turned to him. "Regret what? That I did not let you fall?" "No," he smiled. "That you chose me, a man of two worlds, a white man. I am not your people." Tana looked at him for a long time, her gaze steady, seeing all the way down to his soul. "No," she said. "That is why I chose you. The old warriors. They only see the past. They see what we have lost. McGraw only saw the future, a future he wanted to build on our graves. But you are the only man I have ever met who sees both. You stand in two worlds. Luke, you feel the pain of both." She touched his face. "That is not a weakness. It is your strength. It is what our children will need, to be of the earth and to understand the sky, to know where we have been and to not be afraid of where we are going." She turned, looking back at the valley. She saw the new world, their world, the children, a mix of Comanche and, soon, white, playing by the creek, their laughter carrying on the wind. They were not afraid. She smiled, and she whispered again, The words he had heard in the canyon, but this time in her own tongue. The words he had asked her to teach him. Nuswaru unumunu uswaru. Ema nupuha wupunita. Ema nupuha nupika. My heart is here, on the earth, in the sky, in you. Luke watched her, his own heart full to bursting. He now understood what she was saying. He knew the words. He pulled her close, his good arm holding her tight. He buried his face in her hair, smelling the sage and the smoke. Home, he whispered, the word a simple, final truth. It was not the lonely cabin on the edge of town. It was not a memory of a uniform, or the ghost of a nightmare. Home was this. It was her. It was the valley. It was the future. It was a new West, one they had bled for, and one they would build together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly appreciate you spending your time with me. Let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts and share this experience with you. Please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And if you really enjoyed it, please hit that hype button to help this story reach more listeners.